Donald Trump's recent executive order declaring a crime emergency in Washington, D.C. has created quite an uproar, both for and against. While there have been many claims on both sides, what I haven't heard, well, except for my radio program, is a real constitutional analysis of his actions. With his recent post about sending National Guard troops to Chicago, I think it's time we do that type of analysis. So we'll do that next on the Constitution Study.
Neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Ingle here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. Teach a rising generation to be free. Glad you could join me today. This whole thing about federal police powers and where they extend, there's a lot of facets to that we could take a look at. Today, we're looking at these specific moves as far as fighting crime in D.C. versus other cities. That's the focus of this. But if you have questions about other topics, well, by all means, go to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Check out this article. You can find the links to double check my research, but you can also ask a question and ask me to go into more detail about some of these other issues. Now, I'll talk more about the website and other ways you can support the work we're doing here at the end of the episode. But for now, let's take a look at this crime emergency in D.C. Before we dive into the situation, there's one thing we need to understand. Washington, D.C. is different from any other city in the nation. What makes Washington, D.C. different isn't that it's the nation's capital, but how it became that. See, unlike any other city in the nation, Washington, D.C. is a federal city in a federal district. Congress, and only Congress, has legislative authority over the district. See, Congress has the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by cessation of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States. What we now call the District of Columbia is that portion of the land given by Maryland for the seat of the government of the United States. Virginia originally conceded land as well, but they asked that it be returned. This means that D.C. is not a subdivision of any state, and for very good reason. The framers of the Constitution did not want members of Congress or officers of the United States to be harassed or manipulated by any single state. Hence the requirement that the states concede land for the district. Since this would be a federal district, the federal legislature, Congress, has exclusive legislative power over it. However, only over that district and other land legally acquired with the consent of the legislature of the state where it is found for things like ports, dockyards, and other needful buildings. That is not to say Congress has always followed the Constitution in this matter. While people often refer to the D.C. Home Rule Act, the proper name is the District of Columbia Self-Government and Government Reorganization Act. The purpose of this act is, subject to the retention of Congress of the ultimate legislative authority over the nation's capital granted by Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the intent of Congress is to delegate certain legislative power to the government of the District of Columbia. As I've already shown, Article 1, Section 8 states that Congress has exclusive legislative authority. Exclusive authority means a power enjoyed to the exclusion of others, at least according to Webster's 1828 dictionary. So if Congress is to have exclusive legislative authority, they cannot delegate some of those powers to another. Otherwise, that authority would not be exclusive. That makes this act unconstitutional and void. But let's put that aside for the moment, like everyone else is doing. So President Trump signed an executive order stating, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, including Section 740 of the District of Columbia Self-Government and Governmental Reorganization Act, Public Law 93-198, as amended, Section 740 of the Home Rule Act, and Section 301 of Title III of the United States Code, it is hereby ordered that President Trump is claiming power under Section 740 of the Home Rule Act and Title III, Section 301 of the United States Code. Let's start with the first. See, part of the Home Rule Act allows the president to act in an emergency. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, whenever the President of the United States determines that special conditions of an emergency nature exist which require the use of the Metropolitan Police Force for federal purposes, he may direct the mayor to provide him, and the mayor shall provide such services of the Metropolitan Police Force as the President may deem necessary and appropriate. Now, contrary to both the words and actions of the Trump administration, the act does not give the President the authority to take over law enforcement within the district. Rather, it allows him to tell the mayor to provide the services of the Metropolitan Police Department, or MPD, as the President sees fit. The act does not give the President the authority to restructure the MPD or to make personnel changes. There's also a time limit to the President's power. In no case, however, shall such services made available pursuant to any such directions under the subsection extend for a period in excess of 48 hours unless the President has, prior to the expiration of such period, notified the chairman and ranking minority member of the committees on the District of Columbia of the Senate and the House of Representatives in writing as to the reason for such direction and the period of time during which the need for such services is likely to continue. The President has 48 hours, 2 days, before he either terminates the emergency or notifies the top two members of the committees overseeing the district in both the House and Senate. He does not have to ask permission, only notify them in writing of the reason for his declaring an emergency. That doesn't mean there isn't a time limit on the powers vested in the President by this act. Subject to the provision of subsection C of this section, such services made available in accordance with subsection A of this section shall terminate upon the end of such emergency, the expiration of a period of 30 days following the date on which such services are first made available, or the adoption of a resolution by either the Senate or the House of Representatives providing for such termination, whichever comes first. So the President has this power for 30 days. Of course, Congress can, by joint resolution, terminate the President's power earlier unless Congress says otherwise. Except to the extent provided for in subsection C of this section, no such service made available pursuant to the direction of the President, pursuant to subsection A of this section, shall extend for any period in excess of 30 days unless the Senate and the House of Representatives approve a concurrent resolution authorizing such an extension. So Congress can technically extend this emergency power indefinitely, but only Congress has that power. Now, I find President Trump's claim under Title III, Section 301 of the United States Code interesting because it reads, the President of the United States is authorized to designate and empower the head of any department or agency in the executive branch or any official thereof who is required to be appointed by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to perform without approval, ratification, or other actions by the President any function which is vested in the President by law, or any function which such officer is required or authorized by law to perform, only with or subject to the approval, ratification, or other action of the President. Section 301 of Title III only allows the President to delegate the authority to perform the actions of the President to the head of a branch of an agency. There is one caveat, though. Provided that nothing contained herein shall relieve the President of his responsibility in office for the acts of any such head or other official designated by him to perform such functions. This means that the President cannot throw up his hand and let someone else do the job. He is still responsible for the acts of those he designates. However, this has nothing to do with his actions under the Home Rule Act. One of the claims I've heard from both politicians and pundits is that President Trump's actions violate the Posse Comitatus Act, which reads, whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or acts of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, or the Space Force as a Posse Comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 2 years or both. First, let's define Posse Comitatus. According to the Free Legal Dictionary, Posse Comitatus referred at common law to all males over the age of 15 on whom a sheriff could call for assistance in preventing any type of civil disorder. Notice that the list of military departments covered by this act does not include the National Guard. There's a very good reason for that. See, according to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrection, and repel invasion. Now, since the purpose of the militia is to secure the states, according to the Second Amendment, it makes sense that they can be used to execute federal law, laws of the Union. Historically, The Posse Comitatus Act has been limited to using the regular military for law enforcement. However, by looking at the definition of Posse Comitatus, using the regular military to maintain order would be a violation as well. What about the deployment of Marines to Los Angeles during the anti-ICE riots earlier this year? According to the U.S. Northern Command, the mission of these Marines was protecting federal personnel and federal property in the greater Los Angeles area. Protecting federal people and property doesn't sound like Posse Comitatus, at least not if it's on federal property. And that's not all. Task Force 51 forces have been trained in de-escalation, crowd control, and standing rules for the use of force. While the Marines were not used to enforce federal law, their stated mission could easily extend to preventing civil disorder. U.S. Northcom's comment on their training would seem to reinforce that belief, making the Marine deployment, not the National Guard, a violation of Posse Comitatus Act. Where does that leave us? Does the President have the legal authority to commandeer the services of the Washington, D.C. Police Department after declaring an emergency? Yes. Does he have the authority to make changes in that department? No. More importantly, does the President have the authority to take similar actions in other cities? Absolutely no. Remember, the Constitution limits the use of the National Guard to executing the laws of the Union, or, as we call them today, federal laws. Does that mean the President can send federal law enforcement officers to cities like Chicago, New York, and New Orleans? Yes, but only to enforce constitutional federal laws. Crimes like mugging, carjacking, and burglary are only a violation of federal law when done on federal land. While I haven't seen an order from the President yet, it's my understanding that this plan is to use the National Guard and agents of federal law enforcement to assist immigration and customs enforcement in executing federal immigration laws. Setting aside the constitutionality of these laws, using the National Guard and federal law enforcement to execute federal law is both constitutional and legal. However, President Trump is claiming his plans to send the National Guard and federal law enforcement to these cities is because of their crime statistics. Since the vast majority of those crimes are not federal, though, the President has zero authority to enforce them. From all of this, I conclude that while parts of what President Trump has done, along with the intentions he has expressed, are constitutional, many are not. It's rather like biting into a nice ripe apple only to find a worm inside. The rest of the apple may be fine, but where the worm exists, it's rotten. Maybe we should cut out the rotten parts of Trump's executive orders before we move forward. Another example why John Jay was correct when he said every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country, teach the rising generation to be free. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they're violated and be the better prepared to defend and assert them. That's what knowing the Constitution is all about, is recognizing when any government official goes too far, and how do you push back? How do you defend your rights? How do you assert your rights? That's what this is all about. And in this case, again, I keep pointing out, D.C. is different because D.C. is a federal city in a federal district, which means federal law applies everywhere. But the rest of the cities, New York, Chicago, Illinois, wherever, those are not federal cities. Therefore, federal law does not apply everywhere. Now, there are federal laws that apply, and that's the only place that the National Guard can be used to enforce those laws, at least if Congress says so. So I hope we've ripped through some of the noise and some of the grandstanding to the actual facts of both the executive order and the law and the Constitution around federal police powers in Washington, D.C. versus other cities. If you have questions, please head to the website, constitutionstudy.com/questions, and ask. I love answering questions. Now, I do ask for a valid name and email address because I'm going to email you a response. If you don't give me a valid email address, I can't respond to you. Now, if you'd like me to answer this on the radio program, there's a checkbox that says, please answer on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'd be more than happy to. These are some of the things we do at the website to help inform other people by answering questions, by providing content, by looking at what's going on from a constitutional viewpoint. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and yeah, it takes a fair amount of money too. See, nobody takes a salary for any of this. We are paying for all these. And if you'd like to help, well, there's a couple things you can do. You can go to constitutionstudy.com/shop and purchase something. Purchase a book, a mug, a t-shirt. Hey, there's also a donation page. You can just donate to the cause, either a one-time donation or a recurring donation. All that money goes to putting on the content like what you see here today. You can also support us through our affiliate. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They take a portion of every dollar and they donate it to organizations that are trying to defend your rights, including the Constitution Study. Now, you get great 4G and 5G coverage across the whole country. Their customer support's 100% US based. And best of all, your money, when you pay your bill, isn't used to promote the woke agenda or the Marxist agenda, but to defend your rights. Now, you can find out more by going to patriotmobile.com/constitution. Find a plan that works for you. See if you're eligible for a discount. Veterans, first responders, even families with multiple lines get discounts. But please use the code Constitution at checkout and you'll get your line activated absolutely free. So please head to patriotmobile.com/constitution, find a plan that works for you, and don't forget to use the code Constitution at checkout to get your line activated absolutely free. Now, I also hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll spread the word. Share this program, this episode. Let other people know there's a place to go to get good, constitutionally sound information and advice. And hopefully, maybe you'll come back next time and bring a couple friends to the Constitution Study.